You've just accessed Hardware is Forever, your source for the expert insights, ideas, and innovations you need to do more in the electronics manufacturing industry. From optimization to operations, join us as we put the pieces together for a better approach to manufacturing. Let's go.
This is Hardware is Forever. I'm Chris Bentliff. Jay Patel is the CEO at Amtech, and he is with us as always. And we are continuing, Jay, our conversation as we start to wind down somehow, unbelievably, about Deming's 14 points. And today, we're talking about point 12, which I think is, well, the point is remove barriers that rob the worker of pride of ownership and or of workmanship. Not ownership, that's important, pride of workmanship. And Deming breaks it down into both the hourly worker, which let's just call that kind of the rank and file, but also managers. Let's talk about that. First of all, what do you think is meant by workmanship? And again, as he wrote this post-World War II, workmanship was probably more literal. So what does he mean? And what are those barriers that you perceive to be that rob these people of that ability to be proud of the work that they're doing?
Yeah, I think, workmanship, that's a good question. Workmanship, I think it's kind of like there's a difference between the art and the science. And the workmanship is something that when I'm working on something, it's my little special thing that I add to it. I could be assembling widgets, I could be writing code, but when I work on it, I have this special thing that I add to it that gives me pride. That is kind of like, okay, I did this, I left my fingerprint on this, and I have contributed to, in a unique way, to, the product or the world, or making a difference in what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. I think, everything that we do ultimately gets used by the people in the global ecosystem, And I think, having that workmanship is knowing what you're good at and adding that little plus part that wasn't there prior to you touching it. And I think that's where really the idea of workmanship comes from me. Like when I talk to people, when I work with people, they always say, hey, you approach this in a different way, or Amtech does it in a different way. And that's what really brings me pride. I could be like everybody else or be another commodity. But when I add that extra value that only I can, or my team member can, or you can, that is the workmanship that I feel like that can add pride. Otherwise, if I'm doing everything, if I am doing what everybody else does, there is a sense of pride that I'm adding and contributing. But the real pride comes in is when I add that special touch into the product that's there.
And that touch, let's talk about that a little bit, because there can be a tension between, look, this is the standardized way we do this thing, and we need you to please do this thing like we have taught you to do this thing, and that we want you to do this thing. And that tiny little, and it can be like, you're great with people, or that communication to that client was right on point, or the way that you handled that stressful moment was really helpful. Like, what are some of those sort of special things, those X factors that don't get in the way of sort of standardization, which is something else that Deming has talked about, but that can augment or make even more valuable kind of that thing, or that product or that service that we're working on?
Yeah, I think, it goes back to all the other principles we talked about, is like management needs to be the one who's helping problem solve, helping set everybody else. Management. Leadership is the one that should be doing it. And if we trickle down all that to the person at the end, adding and creating the value, whether it's software coding, whether it's assembly work, whether it's the engineering and design part of things, and we want to set them up for success, we cannot measure them as they are, just punching and crunching all day, as they are machines. We have to, one, listen to them and get their feedback. And I think, there are parameters where parts have to fit within a quality standard so that it works. However, there is a process to listen, to get that feedback, and then implement it. And I think that's where the push and pull is that leadership really needs to know how to listen. And once they do listen, communicate that we're taking consideration, and there will be a process that we will follow to see if we can implement this or not. And so then if that exists, then people should not be, the only metric or the value they add should not be according to how much widgets they make or code they write or lines of code they write. It should be the quality of that and what kind of feedback and how they're making the process better. And to do that, they all, again, going back to leadership, they need a good working environment, both, health and safety wise and culturally, to make sure that there is a feedback loop there. And then again, setting up for success, getting that process down, writing it down, training. Now, not just educating, but training them how to do the job. And then know that this is a long game. So right now we may not doing it properly, or you may be struggling, or we may be not doing it, but we're looking at for the long-term gain. So long-term win. So there's no pressure for you to execute at this moment. So and that again goes back to leadership is, are we setting them up for success? Are we creating milestone goals? Of course, we want to get to 100% efficiency, but as we launch the product, is 70% okay? And then we'll work, iteratively to get to it may not be 100%, 95% efficiency to be able to hit our pricing targets, our margins, our quality, all those type of things.
You're touching on, and as always, Deming brings these things back. So you're talking about, we can't just measure against quota, which is something that he talked about. And this idea of we've got to teach people the things that we want to teach people for them to be empowered to do their thing. Are those, and you mentioned listening, which is really important. Are those some of the barriers then that he's talking about that get in the way of this pride of workmanship? Because I feel like the priorities between corporate, capital C, whatever that means, air quotes, and your team aren't always in sync. Like, for instance, performance appraisals and your monthly performance or your quarterly performance is so based often on you're talking about these metrics that are so insular and unaware of the bigger picture that I don't think there's a lot of value in those. Tell me about that. Tell me more about what you think about that. Some of these barriers that are getting in the way, things we might not even realize we're doing that could be getting in the way.
I think whenever we track results and expect the results to happen, that is where the barrier of workmanship is going to come, because everybody just cares about shipping widgets. Are we doing it the right way? Are we improving on it? Are we generating scrap? Are we using inefficient process or models? So whenever we focus on the results, and that's our metric, and not the process of, an optimized process, again, culture, quality of the working environment. If we don't focus on those things, then there's a definite barrier to workmanship, because nobody cares about what value I add. Nobody's listening. All they care is that they get their shippables and profit at the end of the month or at the end of the year. So why does it make a difference why I'm here or not? And because that is being recorded, that really robs and creates a barrier to workmanship. Because then why would I want to work harder? Why would I want to put my fingerprint on this? I'll just do what they tell me to do. And it just creates one of those environments that it's like, yeah, I'll come to work every day, but that engagement, that joy, that pride of work is just not there anymore.
Why do you think Deming split this into 2 points? One, as he said, the hourly worker, like, your rank and file, the people who make things go, and management. Is there a difference between what workmanship is in those cases, and are they easily confused, or is there too broad of a paintbrush, applied to these things? Are we not giving enough specificity to what makes pride of workmanship from one sort of category to another? What do you think?
I think the reason why he broke it up is because to put the onus back on leadership. Like, you can't say that I have bad employees, that's why they're creating scrap. And I measure the worth of the goodness of an employee by how much money they make me. Because if that is the case, then again, you're robbing pride of workmanship. The real culprit, or the real reason why we are not making money, is going back up to management. So those type of metrics that is easy and lazy for management to, blame others to see why their goals they're not hitting their metrics, they're not hitting their goals. It's easy to say that you gotta do this, and because that's my job, and you got to make me look better at my job. So I'm holding you accountable, so you make me look better at my job. But really, the job is of management to create an environment and an organization that that generates pride of workmanship, that helps you meet those metrics to make you a successful company.
When you look at this as a CEO, does it cause a moment then of introspection? Like, do you, as you're reading these things, and I know that you're in a process, like a live process of sort of internalizing and applying. So then when you see this Deming, point, do you say to yourself, well, in what ways might I be creating barriers to pride of workmanship? Like, does it put you into a sort of a thoughtfulness, and then what do you do with that? Like, my point is, if I'm a leader, what do I do with this? Like, it's an interesting point, and intellectually I can say, yeah, that makes sense. But how do I start to actually put this in motion? What do I start to do to understand if I and what barriers are created in my organization? How did you handle that?
I think it has to do with it. You first of all, you have to be open to being wrong. I know I heard this really great quote a few years ago, and I think it really said it really well. It's like, I would rather be surprised than be right. And I think that's a good way of saying I'd rather be wrong than right. And but I think number one is you have to make sure that you have to understand that you may be the weakest link in the organization, and we're all fallible. We're not perfect. So number one is like, okay, am I the issue or not? And I think even all the greatest leaders, whether they're businesses or not, they've always looked out and looked for other people for advice to see if they're doing the right thing at the right time for the purpose that they're trying to fulfill. And so number one is I think you have to be very, very cognizant of that, of knowing. And then number two is when you realize that you could be wrong, are you open enough to experiment and go down that path that other people have gone down and been successful? And that is the hardest thing to do, because it's easy for me to tell other people what to do because they have to change. When I have, as leadership, when people tell me what to do and then I have to change, I think it takes a lot of bravery to be able to do that. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of bending and not breaking. And that's a process that all leadership has to go through. And once they've gone through that process and know how to manage that, I think then you realize that once you step away from the way, your particular outlook and start integrating these other best practices in, it takes a little bit of time, but then you'll see like, okay, yeah, they were right. Things do run a lot better. But to let go of that almost controller outlook, because every leadership team, their job is to lead the organization, provide value to the customers, provide value to the stakeholders, provide value to the people who work with you, and make sure that they have the jobs that they have. And so all intention of leadership is good. They are working at those type of things. But again, to step back and try to be humble enough to be wrong and then experiment with something new is a tough process that all leadership has to go through. I mean, everybody has been tested. Everybody has thought that their ideas were right and they failed, and they've learned from that. And other people listen to other people and pivot and implement it and show something great and memorable for it. So I think really just getting yourself in a situation to say, yeah, I may be wrong, and experiment with something and let the experiment take its course to see how it changes is really what leadership needs to change their mindset to.
I learned so much when you start to sort of reveal these internal processes around these things. I love this idea that sort of experimentation, or even just the ability to acknowledge that there may be a different or better way, or even the way that you were on might not be the right one, takes bravery. So if does everything come full circle then? We've talked so much about all kinds of different things, but is that then your responsibility as a CEO to make sure your leadership team, is it also important that you're creating a culture of sort of experimentation? Like, that can be difficult, as you just pointed out, that can be really tough, especially for leaders who've been in this industry for a zillion years, or who have climbed their way up, or who have proven themselves in this way and that way, to then be asked to acknowledge that maybe that's an outdated or an outmoded or simply an irrelevant, or maybe you've got some new idea or whatever. How do you make sure that your leadership team can also be sort of thinking in that same way around, look, we're gonna be an organization that isn't afraid to be wrong, and then can deal with that? What do you do?
So I think real deal leaders, true leaders, understand that you need to experiment, you need to change. If not, then they will be exposed sometime in their career that they are not true leaders. Whether it's an organization that they were not able to take to the next level, whether it's a role that they were not able to fulfill, life will give us feedback on our inadequacies and insufficiencies sooner or later. And I think, if you want to grow, you need to get real leaders, and then to get real leaders, you have to be able to attract them. And that means you have to be that person. And then those type of people will automatically come to you and choose to work with you over other people. I mean, I'm not saying that we're good leaders. I'm not saying that we're bad leaders, but there are companies that with great leadership in our industry and everywhere. And when team members choose to be part of that organization and that culture, they are going to choose the right leaders. So I'm not saying they all come work for me, but if there's an option of 5 people that they can add value to as a team member, as a leader, they're going to opt for the ones with great leadership who understand this type of experimentation model. And those who don't want to do that, they will go and opt for those companies who don't have that culture. So I think, first is having the aha moment and changing. And that's why I say, going down this process with Deming, I have that much more respect for successful business leaders, because a lot of the things that Deming talks about, to build that type of character, you have to be really gifted, because it is not nurtured anywhere in any place you go. These are real gifts, and if you're born with it, or in an environment that helps you develop this, I respect, and you're able to do good with it too. That's the level of respect I have for those type of leaders, that I never realized that these type of things these type of values need to be, or outlook needs to be in that character and that person.
And it's a continued pleasure to figure this out with you and to explore this. I agree with you. And it's interesting that these aren't the things that are sort of readily taught to us, but they're some of the most useful or valuable things that we need to start to consider. Even as we had a conversation last week with Nick, he mentioned he's kind of a student of Deming. He's trying to learn all these things. I feel like emerging leadership is more and more in tune with the value that these points connect to. Jay Patel is the CEO at Amtech. And as always, it's really great to talk to you, Jay, and explore this stuff with you. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation about Deming's 13th point. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for joining us. And a special thanks to our subscribers and followers. Consider becoming one today wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Hardware is Forever is designed, tested, engineered, and built by the manufacturing experts at Amtech. Learn more and let us help you envision your next project with a free Design for Manufacturing assessment at buildamtech.com/DFM.